So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had nice conversations. Just letting everyone come back here. And maybe each pair wants to just sort of put into the group something that you shared together, something around this topic of evaluation or measuring social impact, or questions around learning, or what's something that you just want to sort of share into the center here just before we get into the framing up of investors in change and the rest of our program. Jonas, you were in a room with me. I don't know whether there's anything you wanted to share to get us going about the conversation we had.
Okay, yeah, just briefly, I think our sharing was very enriching to learn what Laura is doing, and the initiative they have, also the school of system change, which for me was a very interesting thing to know, and what they are helping funders to do in terms of how do you find system change that is not even cumbersome for the social entrepreneurs. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other groups want to share a bit? There's this question of, what funders are asking for, and then what social entrepreneurs, social innovators can do, specifically when they're doing quite small and sort of catalyzing change, and then the big reports that they might be asked to write around funding. There's something here from Joshua in the chat. Yeah, all the possible variables that are important to capture. So this question around indicators or KPIs, how do we really think about systemic indicators when especially during the formative stages, when we're just kind of starting to try and understand what's going on. Maybe we don't know what the right things are that it'll tell us what's changing. Any other ideas?
Alex Todd here. One of the things that we talked about is, using behavioral outcomes as a leading indicator of impact. And that can help both in terms of the organizations that are trying to collaborate towards system change, but also with the social programs, the programs that are being run, for them to be able to accelerate progress of their clients or beneficiaries or actors, or whatever we want to call them, and then be able to measure in real time these behavioral outcomes, and they serve as a leading indicator of impact for the impact investors.
Can I jump in here? This is Varia. So just kind of picking up the thread, but going in a slightly different direction, is that what we talked about is the need to be really kind of humble at the beginning when you come in and understand what's the system that you're trying to work with, who are the actors, what do they already know, and kind of not leading necessarily with the metrics, as it were. Although we agreed that I was talking with Tanya, and we agree that it's really important to have some common goals defined, but the way to get there is often not quite defined, and that's the whole point of trying to figure out how you work with systems.
Okay, so I'm sure some more of this will come into the conversation as we move forward. What we'd like to do now is present a little bit more the story, and I guess where we've got to with this Investors in Change program. And so to do that, I'm going to share with you a link to a Miro board, which we've designed, because we wanted to not just share slides, but have you be able to feed in. But I'm also going to share my screen just so that you can actually see as well what I'm talking to in this particular section. So I'm just gonna get up to speed with my frames here. There we go. And share my screen just so you can have a look with us what we're doing. Is that working? My screen sharing is not always great. like you should be able to see things now. So just a little bit of history before we start, and then Abdul and I are going to just take a few minutes to talk us through the story behind Investors in Change and where we've got to, and then we're going to have more of an interactive time on working together around this question around monitoring, reporting, evaluation, learning, whatever we want to call it. So Investors in Change is a 3-module learning journey about systemic change for funders. And when we say funders, they can be from across the spectrum of philanthropy, so grant givers, also impact investing, and also public sector funding. So it's not just philanthropy. Sometimes we hear that kind of funding word and that's what we associate it with. It's really anyone who is has financial resources that they're wanting to invest in creating change. And this was co-initiated by a group of partners. So Catalyst 2030, one of the initiating partners for this learning journey, it came out of the Embracing Complexity report. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with that resource. We can maybe share a link to it. That was published last year, and that was really around, what are the pathways to shifting the funding world towards supporting systemic change, systems change. And that was co-written by Ashoka and Catalyst 2030 and others. And it sort of happened at the same time as a conversation that we at the School of System Change were having with some of the funders who are part of another network called Illuminate, which is also about trying to kind of cultivate the field and practice of systems change. And that includes a set of learning providers like ourselves, a set of practitioners, and also people who are kind of pioneering funders in this space. And so some of the organizations like Garfield Foundation and Langley Chase, also the Midyar Group, MasterCard Foundation, were really part of this conversation about thinking about, well, what is the learning that funders need to do to be able to really support and catalyze systemic change? And part of the framing of it is not seeing it as funders funding systems change, but funders as change makers, as participating in these initiatives to create systemic change. And so what we've done over the last year or so is to design up a curriculum which really follows the principles of the School of System Change, which I head up at Forum for the Future. And the school is really about helping people navigate multiple tools, methods, and approaches from across the evolving field of systems change. So the purpose here is not to say, okay, we're going to write the be all and end all curriculum of how to do systems change funding, and this is going to be a step-by-step approach. What we were really thinking about is, gosh, there's a lot of different practice out there. A lot of it's quite experimental. Some of it's been around for 10, 15 years. Some of it's really emerging practice that's just coming about now. There are things that are going on that are quite different, whether they be on the African continent, on the American continent, in the European continent, in Asia. And what we're interested in is trying to help people navigate these multiple tools and approaches and put together their own toolkit and support their own practice, rather than sort of having one particular method or way of doing things. So that's very much kind of the core of what the school does. And we have programs for a wider group of change makers, but it felt like there was an opportunity here to curate a really special space for funders where they could go on a peer learning journey and really kind of dive into some of the frameworks, the practice, but also the really burning questions that the practitioners in this space are asking themselves. And so what we started to do is, think about who it's for. This is going to be too small to read. Basically, we were sort of trying to think about how might we design a modular approach. So 3 modules that would help funder practitioners really step into this space and step up in terms of their practice. Module 1 is around understanding systems, and we've already heard little bits about that in our just our check-ins from these pair conversations. What does it mean to work with systemic change? What does complexity mean for us? how would that affect how we practice as funders? Then we have module 2, which is actually starting at the beginning of next month. So we've designed the curriculum, and we'll not go into that too much today, but it's really about, okay, so what are the specific funder practices? In that case, how do we work with our partners? How do we make decisions on where the funding goes? How do we understand whether we're funding projects or portfolios or networks or whole systems in order to create change? And then module 3, which is what we're concentrating on today, is really about learning and impact and thinking about this specific piece around evaluating, monitoring, and obviously that's a key piece of the funding approach. You need to be able to understand what the change is that's being created through this resource that's being invested. And at the same time, it's also one of the impediments to some of the more systemic ways of working. So if we want to just take you a little bit on this journey, Abdul was going to talk us through some of what we did in our first module. Can I hand over to you, Abdul, at this point?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Yeah, I'm just in between two screens, so I've got to understand where I am at. But cool. For module 1, I mean, it was actually quite a great amount of people. The cohort was slightly larger than the group that we have here today, and also quite varied in where they were coming from. The one amazing part was also that we had someone from the public sector, and that was a really great, it gave a really great dynamic into the space, because usually it's not usual that folks from the public sector also joins us. So it was an engaging 3 days. A lot of conceptual frameworks were being shared, and a lot of this stuff was both new to some and also quite bewildering to others. But I think the folks that we invited to also share, the folks from the industry that came in to share how to do this work, actually took the cohort through a space that both shared with them a certain language for them to be able to articulate, but also kind of, you know, in a short amount of time, gave them enough to be able to embody some of the work to go through, and then to eventually work with it in deeper outside the program. So first session was really kind of meeting each other, and then we worked in a way to get everyone layered with enough information so that they would be ready for a peer group action. And in this sense, it was really great to put people together and now see how the different levels of experience was lifting everyone's knowledge in how to take this into their own organizations. So there was a dynamic space of cross-pollination and sense-making and reflection taking space in these weekly sessions that we also then had with them. And what I want to do now is maybe just kind of zoom out a little bit and take you into some of what some of the outcomes were, and this little extract that I made by looking at all of the sessions. So there's some learning outcomes that came, and for many there was this kind of better understanding of how to work with the complexity and the uncertainty. And I think maybe just to iterate again, like for many there was a big space to get into this language of systems change, because for some of them they also felt like, whoa, I'm getting into a space where I don't understand half these words and concepts that are being thrown around at me. But in this peer learning space, I think people could really work out what they did understand and what they didn't understand. And so just to give you a little insight into Oh, we have a guest moving some stuff around. That's okay. So the awareness of power became a very big topic in our subgroups, in the sense of positionality also. Where in the system do these change makers find themselves, and what is available to them to kind of bring in these type of changes? Because of the power conversation, we got I think everyone got very in tuned with the idea that locals knows best, you know. So if you're coming into a space, not to come in there thinking that you have the answers in that sense, but having to take time to actually understand where you are. And it's maybe just to iterate that Vaya also just kind of made that notion of, you know, a humble start, which was really great that it also echoed in the program. We spoke a lot about how to convene spaces, and this was also something that many people were looking at. If it is people, if people are at the core of us, how do we create and how do we share best practices of to convene people so that they can solve the challenges that they are in? Maybe just another little element was to say we started off the sessions by talking about power for the mere case of cultivating a space for tough conversations to be had. And let's look at power in relation to some of the racial aspects that are also happening in the world, because if we don't have these conversations with each other, our bodies doesn't understand how to be in a space to talk to or talk about you know, power or race or any of the other complexities that we have in the world. So cultivating a space for having tough conversations was also something that was really amazing to see kind of emerge out of this. There was a lot of visual language. And this is partly because I would record each and every conversation that we had, in the sense of also bringing a different way of knowing and also a different way of being able to channel in so many of the insights in the rooms that we have. It was great to have a space where people felt open to be able to name the challenges. Yeah, naming the challenges to bring that brings about the change. They were constantly in this question of, you know, how do I mobilize my own privilege or advantages within the system? And I think this this cultivation of being able to ask these type of questions really made a difference in how they will be working in the future. We also, in this first module, wanted to make sure that people don't run to be able to answer the difficult question. Because this is also a bit of a default for many of us. You know, we see the problem and then poof, we're going to go and solve it. What was important here with all these different tools and ways of kind of getting to the core of the challenge and analytical tools, and, you know, not to jump to the diagnosis so fast, was really to help people hold onto the challenge, hold onto the question, because it's there where a more nuanced way of answering that challenge came in. So we also sat in a space where we wanted to actively also give people tools, but also give them a space where they can unlearn some of these tools. And in this unlearning is to be able to bring it into their own spaces, because the way we've, you know, it's a little, it's too presumptuous for us just to kind of put down information and say that's the way you've got to go and use it in your specific organization. There is a level of unlearning and then again learning with your own people around you. Lastly, there was great focus put on positionality where they are within the systems, what type of leverages are around them, and to be able to kind of seek how they can become the changes. So there was a lot about becoming, probe, what can I put together, what can I weave or stitch together, and to remember that creating this type of change that they with the locals wanting to bring in is not an overnight thing. I think this was a really great aspect for many people, is that their ideas around time became a little bit more realistic, in the sense that change also needs time, because the systems that we are working in also took time for them to build themselves as solid as they are. In last, a great way of language and how we spoke with each other was also to kind of create, you know, these visuals. And in the middle, we have this piece here where there's a clock and there's a cloud. And this was brought in by one of our contributors. And again, we found simpler ways to be able to talk about some of the work that has a language that sometimes is a bit alienating. And so, you know, is the work that we're doing more clock-based, like, you know, incremental, or is it more cloud-based that is, you know, more in the abstract? And this was really a great space to engage with people. We're so looking forward to kind of engage them in our module 2. And also really great to have you guys here with us. Yeah, Laura, that's a quickie that I did there.
That's great. I wonder whether we just open up a little bit if anyone has any questions on this. And you know, it's difficult, I guess, for us to relate. So there's storytelling, there's some visuals, but it's difficult perhaps for you to understand, you know, what was this learning journey people went through. Or I can jump in and talk about what's happening in module 2, and we can move on to, you know, how we can have a conversation together of where this is going in the future. But I just wanted to open up if anyone had any questions at this point. It doesn't look like it. Okay. In which case, I'm going to just go on and present a little bit about module 2.
Laura, let me ask a question here. We've been funding systems change work for at least 5 years, probably longer. We fund both organizations that work in a systems change approach, and we also fund a hub organization that acts as a backbone for the sector in which we work, which is all about systems change. This is in the field of water, sanitation, hygiene in the developing world, very focused. A lot of the discussion here, it doesn't really resonate with me. It's not that I don't understand it. I mean, it's not that I disagree with anything you're saying, but it doesn't seem to be very practical in the way of what we do for a living. And I think one of our, Susan Davis, who runs the WASH Agenda for Change, went through one of your programs, through one of your remote programs. And I think she found that helpful. So we're aware of, you know, what the school does, but I'm trying to figure out how this relates to organizations where when they talk about systems change, they're talking about being on the ground in a district in a developing country and needing to interact with multiple parties in order to achieve sustainable outcomes. And that's what we support. You know, everything you've said, of course, you have to listen, you have to be humble. Yeah, if you're not doing any of that stuff, you're not doing your job. But I don't, you know, the issues we struggle with are much sort of more practical. How do you deal with funders who fund for attribution instead of contribution? You know, those are the sorts of things that we deal with all the time. And, you know, and what you're talking about here seems a long way away from that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's partly because what we were looking at in this first module is really try and sort of surface some of the questions that people have about what it means to work systemically. And at the same time, what Abdul didn't talk to so much is the content of the, sort of framework oriented or practice oriented sessions. So we introduced several different systems diagnosis tools. We introduced practices from funders who've been doing this work for, 10 to 15 years, the journeys that they've been on in terms of how they're shifting their practice. And I guess this distillation is more actually like it's the what we sometimes call the inner work, or kind of like the conversations that you also need to have to enable system change work to happen. And then, yes, of course, that means that we are getting really practical in terms of like, well, what does it mean to understand a system? Something what we were saying about, don't lead as the funder, listen to the people on the ground. What does it mean to, think about different approaches to logic models? What does it mean to kind of dig down and look at the deeper causes that are under the surface? And what are some of the tools and approaches that help us do that? And it's just that, I guess that's sort of not, that's not the conversations that were going on in the peer learning groups necessarily. I think some of that learning was going on, but a lot of the conversations were more about, okay, well, what does this mean for us to sort of shift in how we're being as much as how we're doing, So that was something that we noticed that was a bit different perhaps to what we might have thought to start off with. But perhaps also speaking to module 2, which is coming up, might help get into some of that more, practical side of things, because actually what we're going to be doing in this module is really thinking into, well, therefore, what are the strategies for, change or new approaches in the context of power? As we said, that was a big subject that came up in the first module, and then money, So what does it mean to think about the future of money? What does it mean to think about the role and positionality and the power of the communities of people who are involved in this, in order to be able to kind of really think into futures work? So what we're going to be doing together is starting to look at really some of the more innovative approaches, which are about supporting narratives, supporting, investing in imagination or in futures, not just in problem solving. And so, some of that longer term approaches to funding, where we're thinking about, okay, well, how do we actually imagine this on a 10-year or a 15-year timescale, not in a 1-year project or a 3-year, which is already long for some funders, a sort of 3-year cycle. And we're also going to talk about how systems change can open up opportunities, not to fund, just one project or organization, but to fund networks and even ecosystems of change. And so we've got some examples of where funders are coming together to actually, convene different actors around an issue and fund that whole ecosystem of change makers, rather than kind of a portfolio of projects on a particular issue. And so that speaks a little bit to some of what you were saying about, like, what does it mean to have perhaps a backbone organization, or a semi-formalized or formalized network of organizations that are working on a similar issue, but with different roles in that system in order to create change. And then there's something as well around really thinking about collaborative funding approaches, or understanding about how decisions can be devolved to people who are closer to the issues on the ground. And I think that's also something that you were just speaking to about, like, how do we really think about, the decisions not being made by the board of the funder, but really being made by the people who are on the ground and can see where the resources are most needed. And so there are many, collaborative, participatory funding approaches now as well that really help with that. And again, what we're trying to do here is, bring in both funder practitioners and systems change thinkers, framework designers, to give people more confidence in sort of testing out quite practical tools and approaches for designing and creating more systemic strategies for funding. But I guess we're kind of at this level that's slightly higher up than that, which are the issues that we want to address directly. And so what I wanted to invite us to do at this point is, you know, this is our blank canvas, as it were. We're going ahead with module 2 in June, and module 3, which is this question around sort of learning and impact, monitoring, evaluation, exactly that question of like, how do we shift from an attribution to a contribution model? You know, this is coming up in September, and at the moment we've got some ideas, but we don't necessarily have a clear sort of layout for this curriculum, and we'd love to hear some of the perspectives that are in this space, both from change makers and social entrepreneurs and their experience, and also funders about, you know, what are some of the key pieces here when, you know, we're thinking about evaluating systemic change, and giving funders who are perhaps on more of a journey, who aren't quite there yet in terms of, you know, really investing in systems change, how they can have a better understanding of how systems and complexity thinking can influence how we approach monitoring and evaluation, some of the practices that you think are really great, or that you've, you know, used yourselves, or that you've seen with others, and, you know, what it means to kind of make a step on this journey to shift from a sort of attribution and impact approach to more of a learning and systems health approach, you know, like being in something that is more about shifting and changing than it is about kind of linear following of indicators. So at this point, what we wanted to do, I'm just going to stop sharing because I can't see everybody, is to really think about, you know, is there anything that you guys would like to feed in to the conversation about learning and impact, and that we could take into consideration for the curriculum design? Hello, go ahead. Can you unmute if you wanted to say something? And Valja, I noticed you wanted to come in too. I just saw Haluk, we haven't heard from yet. I still can't hear you. Haluk, maybe can you unmute?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I tried to unmute as much as possible. So sorry. Actually, I'm relatively quite new in the field, and I'm coming from the business world, and always I was an entrepreneur, and I'm an intermediary currently between big investors and the founders. So my point is this: in order to, people want to found systems that they want to change. However, it is very related to create an infrastructure related with capacity building of major actors. And one of this infrastructure I refer to is to change the language, to change the language between the founders and the social entrepreneurs, and not necessarily the way they look at the problem, but the way they look at each other as well. So I believe that an important part of measuring the progress is measuring how they collaborate. So that's the point I wanted to underline. Thanks.
Let me jump in there for a sec. One of the things we've learned in funding systems change is it's always easier to measure the what than the how. And I think that speaks to the point that Haluk just made. The what is you can measure the hardware, you can measure the money that goes into, the things that are most tangible to measure, whereas a really critical part of understanding whether a system functions is to understand the relationships, the networks, the incentives, the motivations that that allow the network to be functional or not. I'm the advisor to a USAID project that has spent the last 3 or 5 years using network analysis and other sort of more academic tools, trying to actually put some language and techniques to that. It's very hard to do that. It's much harder to measure the how than the what, but it is to some extent the secret sauce in understanding whether a network is working. And the way I describe this is I can go to any district or country where we support work or we support organizations, and I can have a conversation with somebody there and they will tell me whether or not the system works. They may not use that language, but they know, they know who to talk to, they know who's got the power, they know where the bottlenecks are. I've had a standing offer in our sector for years now that to fund a 360-degree, sort of thing you'd see in a corporation where you do a 360-degree review of somebody up, down, sideways, because that allows you to understand how well people are playing with each other in the sandbox. And understanding those sorts of relationships are critical. So if you're going to talk about, measurement, really try to, pick up on measuring the how, not just the what.
Can I, maybe just to really agree with everything you've just said, Louis, I think it's absolutely spot on. I think in terms of the measuring the how, I think the thing is people do it intuitively, right? And I think it's a lot about, you mentioned trying to do it very academically, which is good for some things and it gets the attention and it gets papers published, et cetera. But I think what's really critical is to try to get people to name these things and talk about them in the context where they're actually working, and to start to use that language to be able to describe what does change look like, right? And I think that's not easy, and I think I'm not sure that there is the one given tool that does that. But I think the way we have approached, so I work for a funder, a collaborative philanthropy. It's called Co-Impact. And the way we have tried to approach it is, one, actually to first of all be really mindful of our role in the system and try to not be systems orchestrators to the extent at all possible. I think that's something that I'm making a slightly different point here now, but I do want to maybe come back to it at some point and kind of raise that issue, because I think a lot of us are, Laura, you also talked about how, it's about funders being the change actors. And I think, I don't know that I agree with that. I'm not exactly sure that I understand fully what you meant, but I think we have to be aware of what we bring. And I think to the extent possible, we should not try to be at the forefront of being a change maker in a particular context. That said, going back to the, Louis, what you were talking about in terms of measuring the how, I mean, I think it's what we try to do, and of course, with a lot of failing along the way, is try to support various actors at different levels who kind of are part of the same system, to try to figure out what are the relationships, what are the motivations, how do you put that on the table, how do you talk about it openly, and therefore how do you describe it when you do see change happening. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I'm quite familiar with Co-Impact. I was colleagues with your founder at Gates Foundation for about 8 years. No, I think, so going back to practical things, Laura, for your third module here, one of the things that we find very helpful with organizations is making sure that they know the difference between their own theory of action and the theory of change. And the way everybody uses those terms differently, so I will define what I mean by them. Theory of action to me is what a particular organization does, and theory of change is how the whole sector or the system changes. And I've sat on boards of social ventures. I sit on of NGOs, and often the organizations don't differentiate between what they think they need to do and the overall change that needs to happen. And it's really important for them to understand that. Even our smallest grantees, we don't have a very long application process, but even for our small grantees, we want them to be able to differentiate between what they are intending to do and how that contributes to the overall picture. And I think for funders, it's very helpful to be able to have that discussion, no matter how large or small. I discovered this years ago when I was funding the World Bank for some work, and I asked them in Ethiopia, draw me a map of who's doing what in the rural sanitation sector, and ended up with 15 different functions and 40 different organizations doing different things, you know, government, non-government, NGOs, private sector. And just that matrix, which took the bank about a year to put together, and even the World Bank, as big as it was a single line on that matrix. You know, fulfilling some of the functions, but it also enabled them to look and say, hey, we really have to work with all these other players because we're just a piece of it. And if, you know, if you don't understand that, if you've got a grantee that doesn't understand that, or an investee, it's very hard for them to make progress against systemic problems.
That's great. Alex, is there anything you'd like to add to just this conversation, or where we've got to so far, what you're hearing?
Yeah, very interesting, taking lots of notes, a lot of experience here. I think behavior change, I'm coming back to the original point. How do you incentivize people to embrace a new mindset, a new culture, new habits, and so I think that it all starts with behavior change, and we can track it's possible, and we have a solution for it. We have technology that does that. It's a commitments-based nudging system that affects behavior change and tracks behavioral outcomes. And so that's why I'm particularly interested in hearing what everybody has to say, because I think we can help to measure not only the tangible outcomes of behavior, but also you know, the interactions that happen between the parties, and to actually help gather the data to build those maps of the relationships between the different parties in the ecosystem. So yeah, this really resonates with me. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to participate.
Yeah, I'm interested, Vajra, to come back to your question around, you know, not being the systems orchestrators. And I guess it's also this question of, you know, okay, so we're going to do these maps and find out who is where and who is doing that work, and what does that mean to be doing that work. I'd love to hear a little bit more of your view on that and pull on that thread a bit.
Yeah, thanks. I'll start, and I think others can also come in and comment from their experience. So so I think where I'm making a difference is that it's we as a funder, it's not really for us to do all that mapping and to understand and to, I mean, yes, to a degree, yes, but it is for us to figure out, or we have an open application process, right? So we invite people to kind of come get in touch with us based on a systems change approach that they are putting forward. And through that process, when we work with them, it's about figuring, they're the ones who need to understand and do the mapping and figure out who are the actors, what are the levels, what are the layers, etc. So it's like the exercise needs to happen for somebody who is in that context and who's trying to solve a real life problem in that particular context within a system. Then, but I think what I'm trying to say is that I don't know what the right term is. It's not a firewall because there's no such thing, but there is some sort of a distance that it has to do with being conscious about the effect that we have on any given system, right? And us coming in as a funder into that system. And we can't completely take ourselves out of it. That's not possible. That also has weird connotations of being a puppet master in the background or whatever, but being just conscious of that, right? And understanding that it's not for us to make those choices and decisions. So the way we think about it at Co-Impact is that we'll get behind an organization that we have supported for at least a year through a design grant process to really work out for them what change means in their context, right? And then once we sort of agreed that, yes, this is after an entire year, that this is an organization that we're happy to support long-term. So here's the things that it should be, you know, in our view, it should be long-term and general support, right? It's not project, it's not tying it to what dollar that you gave, bought, whatever. It's about, this is an actor that is really instrumental in this particular context that can get change, that can get positive change to happen on which you align, and you're going to put your effort behind them. So it is this, yeah, it's this dance about how do you support that without, you know, putting a huge amount of your own pressure or requirements on top of it. And then maybe just aside, like where I do think that we should throw our weight around to the extent that we have it is with other funders. So there's the funding ecosystem, right? And the funders, and we have a lot of opinions, I'm sure in this room as well, in terms of, you know, what is a good funder, right? And so some of the things that we value, for example, we would encourage other funders to do is to provide long-term, non-project based general support, right? For a goal that you design to get, that you kind of define and agree on together, but not on the mechanics of it and the log frames of it, et cetera, et cetera. So let me stop there. I could probably go on.
That raises a bunch of really interesting questions, Farja. I'm going to point out that I'm on a panel tomorrow on funders of systems change, so we'll be discussing that. Somebody from Ford Foundation is on that. A couple of other organizations, Open Road and Echidna Giving, I think, are the other. Matthew is helping to organize that, and he's nodding. So hopefully we're going to have, I think, a pretty specific discussion there about what it means to fund systems change. And certainly, you know, one of the things we've done for a long time is to provide long-term funding for organizations, flexible funding, in part because the majority of the funding they get is always outcome-based, and it has to be because it comes from the big funders, the bilaterals and the multilaterals. What they really often need is the flexible funding to learn. But I wanted to ask you a question, Barja. Has Co-Impact ever funded a group of organizations trying? Let me give you a specific example. Let's say there was a country or several districts in a country where you were committed to operating on a systems change sort of basis. And ultimately what that means is having a single measurement system. And that would help with the contribution versus attribution problem, because if there was a single measurement system, you would then sort of parcel it out, and you would recognize that no single organization was getting everything done. But I'm wondering, have you guys had a situation where you funded multiple organizations that truly have to work together in a system in order to achieve a common outcome?
Happy to answer, though I don't want to hijack the entire meeting having this conversation. So let me be brief, and then we can. And if I may, can I just say that my name is pronounced Varia? Sorry, Varia. I know. Yeah.
Thank you for telling me. My apologies.
It's no problem. Thank you. So we have not, but we're moving in that direction, right? And so but the thing is, we don't want to be the ones who decide who are the key actors in the ecosystem to fund, right? Like, again, it's like being on the outside, say, here, I need this kind here. So we are trying to enter this space rather organically, to where in a country, we start with one entity, with one organization that we have found through our process, and we can talk, kind of what that is, if that's of interest. And then, which tends to be they tend to be civil society organizations, but not always. And we tend to partner with them from 5 to 7 years, anywhere between $10 to $25 million for a systems change initiative. So big money, longer time, big kind of a goal. And so that is, in a sense, for us, like an anchor. Now, what we're starting to realize is that, you need different entry points within the system, and different actors correspond to different things. So in a particular context or country, we're starting to look at who else is in that ecosystem that is already active, that we may not necessarily even be aware of. So working with the partners who are there to say, look, if your strength is working with a particular sector, but there is a women's movement, for example, and we know the role that women's movements or rights or organizations play in certain things, now how would that work together? And so again, it's a really delicate way. Like, I don't think we figured out how to enter into that in a way that doesn't, we don't want to do strategic philanthropy, right? We don't want to be the ones who are the strategists playing the chess pieces. That's not what we want. What we want is to support a range of actors in an ecosystem. Now, how you go around identifying and supporting those, it's still an open question for us. So, yeah.
We'll take this offline at some point, Faria, but this effort we support in the water, sanitation, and hygiene area started from the ground up with organizations that self-identified and decided to cooperate together. And from that, they became members. And it completely agree with you. You can't tell people to operate that way. They have to make the decision on their own. Once they do, it's very helpful and powerful. But that is an organic process that has to start from them. And if it does, it's great. But even when they do that, and even when the government is part of that thing, it's still tough. I mean, even under all those, because by and large, the system isn't set up to reward that. We've just had, I'll share with you separately, Vario, we just had a evaluation done of this hub organization that we funded. And happily we're not the only funder, but the principal funder, and lessons learned from the first, several years of their operation. And one of the interesting things that came out of it is, yes, there were the evaluators who really specialize in collaborative approaches. They're not sector specialists, but they looked at the collaboration and said, well, there's a whole level of things we can answer on the TOR, which was about how well is this hub organization, but then there's we got to take it up a level to look at the overall system in which they're operating in, because we can't really answer the one question without answering the other. And it's, so yes, I mean, that's the nature of the beast. And like anything, you always have to be aware of your own influence on the system. But I don't, that can be done. You don't do it perfectly, but if you're aware of the fact that you're going to cause an influence, you can usually try to avoid the worst mistakes.
Yeah, and I'm really interested hearing this, because we've actually heard a full spectrum of approaches, and we do know of funders who also do convene actors who perhaps don't know each other, and it doesn't happen organically, and who also have then encouraged, I guess, unusual suspects to come together around issues, and it's a different approach. So I guess one of the things I'm hearing here as well is that there's so much experimenting and learning going on in the funder practice in this space at the moment, so that actually, as you were saying, Varia, there's some principles that you work with and that you're wanting to spread, and then there are different experiments in taking different approaches, and the key piece is almost like how to share that learning across a wide set of actors, and even events like this and the panel you'll be speaking to, Louis, around what is going on in the funder space, and being able to have open conversations about the fact that we don't know yet, and that we're still testing things out, and that there are multiple approaches, I think is in itself a really exciting piece. I'd love to just see whether we've got a minute for a couple of people. I don't know, Tanya, whether you just came in to listen, if you had anything to share. Haluk and Alex, whether there's something that you wanted to contribute to the conversation, because I know that Abdul has also been drawing a little bit for us and can help sort of sum up some of the conversation that we've had today, so we can really kind of see where we've got to. Thank you, Haluk. Do come in.
Yeah, I wanna ask, with all my ignorance, something very, very small. For example, when you look at the sphere of VC versus startups, there are lots of VCs who are shaping the performance of the startups, and if VCs were not active in shaping the startups, most of these startups would not become unicorns, because it may be seen, of course, as a manipulation, but it may be seen also as a contribution. So my point is that there are things that are opening organically in the ecosystem, but there are things that are waiting to emerge in the ecosystem that certain actors have to contribute to make it, as the name of the group, catalyze. So it may not be a very bad approach to try to maximize the contribution of the founders in terms of more long-term collaboration and a little bit forcing the actors to collaborate further rather than they would do themselves. Because one of the issues I see is also that there are lots of fragmented social entrepreneurs that might work together, but that fail to do so because they want to achieve certain things, like the theory of action is more important for them than the theory of change in terms of Lewis. So I believe that especially for Varya, this may be seen as a more contributive approach than manipulative approach, so to speak.
Interesting.
Thanks.
Thank you, Haluk. And thank you, Tanya, for your little message. We understand about spotty internet. I think all of us have had plenty of that.
Haluk, I'll respond briefly. A foundation I know has supported a particular venture in the clean cooking area for probably 10, 15 years. And it was very much like you said, did the venture succeed because they had the support, or did the foundation choose a winner to start? Trying to understand the difference between those is really challenging. Varya, I just want to mention one other thing to your point about funders cooperating. In this main sector where we work, water and sanitation, we for about 4 or 5 years, we met, Osprey met with 4 or 5 other funders once or twice a year to exchange notes, learn from each other. A couple of years ago, we opened that up, and we now have an active group of 23 funders in the sector, and a part-time coordinator and we've been running seminars on everything from systems change to menstrual health, so that we can learn from each other. And so I think there are opportunities for funders to actually work with each other, learn from each other, and hopefully get some synergies out of it. I found it really helpful, in particular, going from a very large foundation like Gates to a tiny foundation. I've ended up with a bunch of virtual colleagues who we can work with together and rely on for certain things, and hopefully vice versa. So there's a lot of roles for funders, but certainly in the systems change area, one of the biggest problems is the funders. Most funders fund, to Laura's earlier point, sort of on a straight arrow sort of thing. They want to understand what they want to be able to attribute an outcome to what they're doing. And so it's changing the behavior of those funders is important. And that's a very long-term process. I was talking to a funder yesterday who I hadn't met before, and funders are quite idiosyncratic typically, and often very sure that they know what they're doing. And that behavior can be changed, but that's a multi-year process and a long, but I think it's worth it because if you get that right, it feeds through the system in a positive way.
Absolutely. And there's something I loved from one of the first sessions we ever ran at the School of System Change on embracing complexity with Jean Bolton, who's a wonderful thinker, practitioner, author around complexity thinking. And she said, the real question, if you're going to take one thing away from my session, it's asking the question, what else is changing? So really thinking about not that it's a long-term journey, but the first step is to really just open up to other possibilities. And particularly she was talking about, monitoring approaches there where, people were filling in the reports because they'd had these indicators and they had to fill out the indicators, and there was a whole load of other things going on that were being changed by the project, but no one was asking them about that. And so they weren't seeing what was going on. They were just seeing the small progress on the indicators they had established, and that actually there's something about learning to do things on top of what you're already doing, I guess was really what she was saying. Is it doesn't mean that you throw all of your monitoring and evaluation out the window, or that you stop doing any project funding overnight, or that, that it's almost like, what else can you do that adds on a layer of complexity thinking or complexity approach to what you're already doing as part of that longer journey that you're speaking to, Louis?
So Laura, to go back to the original, I think that the point of your session here, we fund a variety of systems change organizations. Some of them are what we call aligned organizations, which basically work this way as part of their core DNA. For those organizations, which we almost always provide flexible sort of organizational level funding that they can use, we use their metrics. We don't tell them what to report on. But what we do try to do over time, and it's a long process, and goes back to what Barry was saying, there's a give and take, is if we're not fully happy with their metrics, we engage in a discussion with them about what those metrics might be. And over time, those metrics may morph into a direction that, from our perspective, may give a better indication of how successful they are. But the really good organizations are the ones, who have learned how to report on this. And I can give you some examples of organizations that I think do a very, maybe 5 years ago weren't, but now do a pretty darn good job of reporting on systems change and being able to measure it. Not perfect, and the how is always the hardest part, but they're getting better at it. But I'd much rather take a report that they're producing internally for their board or for their own management and be able to work with that rather than tell them how to respond. First of all, we're only giving them a couple $100,000 a year for a $15 or $20 million organization. It would be stupid for us to say this is how to report to us. But that relationship is a long-term relationship. I've known many of these organizations for 10 or 15 years and seen how they've evolved. So I think there's a lot to be said if you're going to have that sort of relationship, for understanding them and understanding how they're measuring themselves.
Can I just add here really, really quickly that, so just to underline that what we also try to do is to work with the partners that we support to see if to help them get in a position to where what they measure is basically they to have one strategy and one report for all the different donors that fund them, right? So that they are the ones who are holding the power in that sense. And this comes from, actually, I worked for years in practitioner organizations that actually managed to do this. People say it's impossible, but we actually invited donors, said, you're welcome to join us on our journey to do good work, but here's how we're going to measure, here's what we're going to measure, and here's how we're going to report on it. So you can come and, take it or leave it. And in fact, we could never work with the Gates Foundation because they just would not agree to those terms. But we had a lot of funders who would agree. So it's about putting power, in the hands of people who know what they're doing, right? And then, but just as you were saying, Louis, it is about, it's hard work and it's not perfect. And so if you can be a thought partner along the way to help people figure that out, because how do you measure whether a system is changing or not, right? And some of it may be behavior, as Alex was saying, but there's lots of other things as well that you need, So I think, I'm gonna stop here. Although, actually, if I can, I don't know if this is going to be useful to you, Laura, but I can share offline if after the session. We're trying at Co-Impact to kind of do both things at the same time. Almost, we do have dashboards, right? So as complex as we understand systems change to be, we try to arrive with the partners at something that we call a dashboard, right? And in there, is a range of measures, some at the population level, some at the system level, and some for them as an organization. So those three levels we try to hold together. How we get there is a whole long story, what's in it, who measures, etc. But it is this push-pull between how do you kind of support the change makers, put your weight behind it, and yet try to arrive together at some understanding, joint story that you can tell of how that change is happening, right? And so that's been a really interesting journey. And I think this session is about to end, but I'd be happy to.
That would be lovely. Yes, I'd be very happy to continue the conversation with any of you who want to engage further with this. And it's been a lot of really great thinking. I'm just going to hand over for a couple of minutes while we end. Abdul, did you want to share anything that you've been scribbling behind here, just to kind of close us out with an overview of some of where this conversation's gone over the last hour and a half?
By all means, and this was, I mean, again, the was super interesting, and I love the wedge that you threw in there, Louis. Thank you for that. And he's thinking, what's he talking about?
What's he talking about?
Yeah. Let me just change my camera view. And so here quickly the session started, and we quickly took a look at module 1 and a little bit of module number 2. And then I think what is interesting is all of this here. And I'll just dip into some of the things that I think will be very interesting for us to even look at further. This behavioral measurement, there's something in there to be able to try and understand. I also heard that there was a technology about it, so that there's maybe something more to scratch in there and understand. I really love that some points of what we were thinking about was also mentioned. I mean, language and the way they look at each other, in the sense of that relationship there, I think was really amazing. So thanks for that also, Haluk. And also to kind of look at how are these actors collaborating could be very interesting into putting into words, and also just kind of putting into the system to start thinking about that. I really love this, make sure to understand this theory of action and theory of change, organizational centric and to like the overall change within the sector. I think that will be very useful as a way of talking about it. It's going to be a useful way to articulate some of the complexities we're walking into. Here was also something around the funder sector, like what's happening there, and that it's such a it's something that is being worked on, but also everyone is still finding out like what it actually is. And I think just naming that is also kind of giving anyone that is entering this work a way to kind of also deal with, you most of you are working in the unknown. There's so many unknowns to this, which is amazing. So my battery power is almost running out, so I'm gonna.
So's our time up, so I think that's all. That's well aligned.
Yeah, all the best.
And great to, just to see how we're capturing some of this, and we are very happy to come back to you. I think we've got your email addresses if you signed up to the session, and reach out and also just kind of share where we get to in the next level of detail of what the learning outcomes and some of the sessions and conversations will be in this final piece. So thanks everyone for a really small scale but very lively conversation. Really lovely to have you with, very appreciative, and I wish you all the best with the rest of your Catalyst week.